I watched Squid Game, and I couldn't help but notice Squid Game is pretty much a perfect analogy for the modern dating scene. Specifically, Squid Game is exactly what it's like trying to date as a man these days. If you don't know, basically the way Squid Game works in the show is there's 456 desperate gambling addicts competing in a series of games to try to win 45.6 billion won, which is equivalent to 30-something million dollars USD, and only one person can win and everybody else dies. Although it is possible in the show for there to be more than one winner if all of the competitors cooperate, but spoiler alert, that's not how it happens. And everyone that's competing is doing so willingly, although they didn't know beforehand that they'd get killed if they lose. But even after they do find out the truth, most of the competitors still choose to keep playing because they're just that desperate. And the reason that the Squid Game takes place is just so some wealthy psychopaths can watch it and place bets on it. Now, I don't think the writers intended for Squid Game to be a metaphor for the modern dating market. I think it's meant to be a commentary on capitalism and classism or something like that. But as I was watching this latest season, I found it impossible not to relate everything I was seeing to my experiences over the past several years trying to date women. And I don't think my experience is particularly unique. There's millions of lonely, desperate men these days that find themselves in the same situation. So think about it like this. The competitors in the Squid Game, it's a bunch of desperate people that are competing for a very large sum of money. And only one of the desperate competitors can actually win the money in the end, even though it's easily enough money to go around. If all 456 players split the prize money equally, then each player would get about $67,000 USD, which obviously isn't enough to quit your job or anything, but it is enough to be life-changing for anybody that's in a financially desperate situation. So already, it's easy to see the parallels to the modern dating scene, especially considering online dating through apps like Tinder or Bumble or Hinge. Just like how Squid Game has many desperate competitors all fighting for the same prize, the modern dating economy consists of many lonely, desperate men all competing for the same prize, to find love. And just like how in the show, the prize money is enough that it should be able to satisfy all the competitors if they shared it, in the real-life dating economy, there is roughly an equal number of men and women. So theoretically, there should be enough women for each man to find love. But what we see in Squid Game is that all the competitors, or at least most of them, they're so selfish that instead of sharing, they all choose to fight for the opportunity to hoard all the money to themselves. And what do we see with the modern dating market? It's only a very small number of men that hoard all the women to themselves, while most men are forced to stay lonely. I know the analogy isn't perfect. It's not like there's literally just one guy that gets all the women and every other man in the world is left lonely. But, this is a metaphor. It's not supposed to be exact. So in reality, it's more like 20% of men dating all the women, while 80% of men, at best, have to fight amongst themselves for the bottom of the barrel, fat, tatted up single moms that have all already been run through by the top 20% of men back when they were younger and more desirable. And you might think there's a plot hole, so to speak, in this part of the analogy, because in real life, women obviously have agency in which men they choose to date, while the prize money in Squid Game obviously has no agency. It's just a collection of non-sentient, inanimate objects. But if the top 20% of men all agreed to only date one woman each, then a lot of women would lower their standards and go with less desirable men. Not all of them, but a lot of women would. They would lower their standards. So it's still not perfect, but it is similar in that in both Squid Game and in the real-life dating economy, if all the competitors agreed to cooperate and share, then they could do that, for the most part. There are other factors involved in real life that make it seem totally reasonable for some women to just forego dating altogether if they can't get with the Chad of their choice. And some women probably would go that route. They would just stay alone because they just don't need a man to provide for them. But over time, I think all those gynocentric institutions and systems that our society has in place, that would all just collapse if men actually cooperated with each other. So the end result would be that it is technically possible for all the men of the world to find satisfaction in their dating lives if they just cooperate and all agree to only date one woman each. So desperate men are the competitors in the dating game, and the prize is women. And there is enough of the prize to go around, but the competitors are so selfish that they refuse to cooperate. Even knowing how brutal the stakes are for the losers, the competitors' desperation is so great that they willingly choose to keep trying. They choose to keep playing the game, so to speak. So in the show, that means they die if they lose. But in dating, the penalty for losing is depression, misery, feelings of worthlessness, being treated like you're worthless, etc. All of these things. And in some cases, yeah, you do die if you lose because some men do make that choice. And by the time that a man is making that choice, they probably don't feel as if they have any other options. So the consequences of the real-life dating game actually aren't as far removed from the show as you might think. I know a lot of people don't want to admit it, but whether or not you think that lonely men deserve love, the result of lonely men not getting love is horrible, and it's brutal. Not just for those individual men, but for all of our society. Every single man and woman in our society. It's horrible. But anyways, in Squid Game, the show, the competitor or competitors that win the prize in the end do so by making it through a series of games. Essentially, the games are like trials or tests that the competitors must pass in order to prove they are worthy to receive the prize. And most of the games are unfair or rigged in one way or another, or at the very least, the rules of the game are not clearly established before it begins. There's always some sort of catch or some kind of surprising twist. Well, the real-life dating game is exactly the same. Every man has to prove his worthiness in order to not end up alone. In red pill terminology, this is something often referred to as shit tests, but I think this is something everybody knows to be true deep down, and it's really not that controversial of a thing. Women have criteria that a man must meet in order to be eligible to receive her love. So in Squid Game, the competitors might have to pass the test of being fit enough to cross a narrow bridge while jumping over a mechanical jump rope. But in real life, in the dating game, desperate men have to pass tests like being tall enough, earning a high enough income, having an attractive enough face, etc. And these things are a competition, by the way, because all of this is relative. A woman's minimum height requirement is relative to the actual heights of the men in her dating market. So, in a sense, it is like a game that all men are competing at. So, in Squid Game and in the real-life dating game, desperate competitors must compete in order to prove themselves worthy of the prize. The final part of this analogy, although really it does go deeper than this, but I'm just going to leave it at this next point for the sake of brevity. In Squid Game, the games are being financed by a group of wealthy elites, ostensibly just for their own entertainment. But the key thing there is that the reason this small group of wealthy elites orchestrates this whole thing is just for their own benefit. There's no actual belief that if somebody is able to make it through all these games, then they deserve to be rich. There's no underlying philosophy they're working towards. They're doing it just because, one way or another, they benefit from it. In this case, the benefit they get is mostly just entertainment, although they are gambling on it, so there is the potential for monetary benefit. But ultimately, it's just for their entertainment. So, how does this point parallel to the reality of modern dating? Well, the reason that dating is like this in our modern society, it very well might be because a small group of wealthy elites intentionally manufacture the societal pressures required to lead men and women toward certain behaviors that we see reflected in all we've discussed so far about the modern dating scene. And the reason these wealthy elites lead our societies down this path is because they benefit from it somehow. As to how exactly it is they benefit from this, one theory is that by alienating men and women, the nuclear family becomes nearly non-existent, and as a result, men have nothing to strive for. They become complacent. They focus all their efforts on just trying to get laid because they are essentially starving. Because love is a need. Affection is a need. It's a human need. It's not a want. Okay, it is a human need. So basically, the idea is that there will never be a large enough organized group of men to revolt against the powers that be, because the powers that be have forced men into a situation so psychologically damaging that men have no time or willpower left to even think about things like revolution. Aside from that, think about it like this. If you control the access to the thing that people desire most, then you can control the people. So by manipulating our social structure in this way, the wealthy elites are able to limit men's access to women, essentially castrating men, and they're able to set up society for themselves in such a way that they can continue to hoard all the wealth and power. So Squid Game really is a perfect metaphor for the modern reality of dating. And again, I'm not saying the writers intended to be making this analogy. I think the reason it works is just because the show is actually supposed to be an analogy for capitalism. So everything that happens in the show does have some sort of intentional parallel to something in the economy. And since the dating market is a type of economy, everything in the show can be mapped to the dating market as well. But just because it does fit so well, I do wonder if any of the writers actually did think about this as they were writing the show, because I don't know. I really think I'm onto something here, because the parallels just fit so well. And I haven't seen anybody else making an analysis of Squid Game quite like this. So please let me know in the comments what you think. And hey, if you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe.